But I also recognize that if you want someone to reconfigure your phone, any nearby teenager is probably a great bet, right?
or younger.
Yep. Yes. A middle schooler. That's right.
You are listening to What's Next? Conversations with Boomers, and I'm Barb Desmarais, your host. Are you a boomer who is retired, but you realize you really can't afford to retire, so need to look at your options again and how to generate full-time income? Or are you someone who, for the most part, is living comfortably, but would like more money for vacations, or you've had a dream to buy a big sailboat? Or are you someone who doesn't need to work, but you want to explore meaning and purpose? We're often told that one of the factors that contributes to longevity is having a sense of purpose or having meaning in your life. For this episode, we have a guest who's going to lead us through all of these scenarios and offer a game plan, as well as offer some interesting statistics. Mike Dwyer is the founder of Emplana Career and has spent many years working with boomers who are excited to chart a new path. He's helped many of us navigate new technologies and corporate changes. He knows how easy it is for our demographic to feel left behind. So he's there for us as we embark on a senior Encore. Welcome, Mike.
Thank you so much, Barb.
It's really great to have you on, and I know that this is going to be a very useful resource because most of us are in one of those categories. So, can you break down the different scenarios and share how you go about reaching the desired outcomes, and expand in any way you want?
Well, thank you for that wonderful invitation. First of all, there's some overlap between the different scenarios. I mean, maybe a little bit of different risk tolerance. If the market has been too unkind to your 401k or whatever the scenario might be, and you really need to get going, you might be doing something that preserves your current work while investigating. Another thought you might do is if, there's a wonderful market research, labor market research company that has a concept called lifeboat jobs, things that are not that hard to get to. But
That's a good name, lifeboat jobs.
And one of the examples they give is a tax preparer. It's something you can ramp up in a moderate amount of time. But I'll tell you, when I work with people, there's almost always some homework that needs to come first, some reflection. And really, I break it down into a two-part dynamic. One is retrospective and internal. And Barb, neither you or I are 20 years old. So
We are not.
right? I can feel very comfortable in just alluding to the fact that both of us have had whole decades of experience. So
Decades, yep.
what I want to see happen when I work with somebody is the first thing, and it doesn't need to be Emplana Career. This isn't a strong arm sales twist. I'd like to share some things that will work whether you come to us or not. So the first thing is this retrospective and internal work. It's a great idea to look through some old emails, files, contact lists. And what you're looking for is there's a very human sound that we make that's something to the effect of, that's kind of interesting, actually, and maybe even possible. And one of the reasons you want people to sift through some of their background in a little bit more detail is because you might get that person to realize, I've actually done a fair amount of event planning or whatever it is. Because as we begin and look at these old nuggets, it gives us some direction. Another thing that can happen is you can realize there's somebody or something you want to follow up with. That was a really interesting company. I meant to see how they're doing now. Because anything that truly intrigues you and interests you is going to be much easier to approach. I use the expression, the cover letter writes itself.
Mm-hmm.
So what I see happening for people, And we'll get to sort of the different pools or, economic realities here. But the other part of the dynamic is looking outward. So as you look retrospectively and internally and start to find things you've done, identify interests, then what you want to do is look out in the outside world and see if any of those map. You want to do some exploration. If you have done event planning, do people need that? And we're not as monochrome as we used to be in terms of job. It's not just a cover letter and a resume anymore. I've hired people off, say Upwork, and I've put people on Fiverr. And these are freelance or gig platforms. And in a past conversation, I've shared with you that something on the order of 9% of Upwork is boomers. So that's by no means a majority, but it's certainly not lonely. There's certainly
It
no
represents a
reason
large number, right? 9%.
of absolutely. So if you think about this dynamic, I'm looking back, I'm looking for contacts, skills, things I've produced, done, or could be good at if I focused on it again. And then you bring that to the outside world and start looking around who wants what. That's the beginning of a dynamic that's going to let you say to yourself, hey, I'm onto something here. Another part of the dynamic that happened is you're out there looking around or you're talking to people. You might get a new whisper altogether. It's a big world out there. And right now, the headlines are kind of ugly in the labor market.
Mm-hmm.
And I work with some grad students at a local university career office, and
Oh,
they're very smart people, and they have some of the same problems that we seniors will have in looking for a job. The bots, right? Everything gets discarded. Well, I'll tell you what. The latest thing I've seen in the business press is employers decrying the fact that candidates are embellishing their resumes using artificial intelligence. So we have this whole game going on where, the candidates are accused of fluffing up and the employers are accused of discarding. What good is any of that?
right,
So
right.
the second part of my dynamic, I talk about this, internal, retrospective, and then external and prospective. But a very important part of it is community. Many of us have heard of a personal board. I've actually helped people set those up. I've helped convene some sessions. If you get the right mix of people who know you and who know the sector you're interested in, that can be critical. And it can lead to all kinds of good things.
Can you expand a little bit on what Upwork is? And also, as you're talking, and I know I thought about this too when we had our phone conversation, everybody has something that they're good at that really is not related at all to the work they did. And you mentioned event planning, and there's a lot of people that are really good at that, or they're really good at decorating, or they're really good at cooking. There's lots of things that I just think it's so exciting that people can give themselves an opportunity to exploit these talents that they have and monetize them.
I absolutely agree. And so when we think about freelance work or the gig economy, it can help to turn our attention to a couple of the big existing platforms. One of them is Upwork. Another one is Fiverr, it began some time ago offshore and literally was about a £5 note, a fiver.
Mm-hmm.
And let me give you a very specific and real example. I know a person who really had maybe too many interests, was having a hard time focusing, and they just had too many skills and interests. And that doesn't translate to a job search so well. So yours truly pushed back a little bit. And what the person did, if you have any marketing background, one of the things that happens there after you've segmented a market is you have this concept of brand persona, where you actually anthropomorphize the particular types of people that, okay, this is a 40-year-old stay-at-home mom. Kids are old enough now. She wants to come back to school. And those are very useful things for the marketing people as they think about doing their marketing. Well, this person ended up on Upwork doing brand persona for a year. Incredibly niche, but part of they had a MBA and plenty of marketing courses and, background in marketing. So that's an example where somebody took something they were good at and put it out there, and that provided them some income and momentum while they figured out their next chapter.
Sometimes, the most challenging part is not having the skill, it's knowing how to market it.
Well, absolutely. And the other part of this, the preparation I talk about, I mentioned community, personal
Hmm.
board. Um, I bring up the example of the bots at both ends of the hiring cycle because we've hit the ridiculous. Some of these grad students I work with are very clever. I've had people spread out 3 or 4 different cover letters across a table at my co-working space and describe to me how they've embedded different triggering keywords in their job search. I mean, that's smart stuff.
Hmm.
And you put 100 of those out and you get 2 maybes back. I mean, it's really dismal. So we want to be working on networking, a community-based personal board. Sure, leave a note on Emplana if you want to have a first free consult or something. But I'm much more interested in talking about these approaches that I think people can do themselves.
Hmm. A cover letter versus face-to-face contact, because I think there's nothing that can substitute for actually meeting the person in person, regardless of what they have on their cover letter. Because writing a good cover letter is a skill in itself, but it may not necessarily represent what that person can offer, right?
Absolutely. And really in this dismal climate, what I'm reporting is that I won't say nothing works, but it's too uphill. So I
Hmm.
think the networking is critical. And one of the things I've been working with recently is we all can use a skills tune up, either at something we need to refresh or something we want to learn more about, something new. I have this little term I came up with recently called topical networking. So what are we doing there? Well, I could take an online course and I could go to the Chamber of Commerce or the Rotary Club or whatever the event is. But what if I were to actually go to some sort of seminar or meetup that's about the topic I'm interested in? Now I'm getting an intersection of actual human eyeballs and finding out more about this topic. Steve Dubin, he's very experienced. He and I have delivered professional networking seminars. Steve quipped, that's worth driving 100 miles for. And I
Yeah.
think he's right. If you could go be in a room of people that are talking about what you're interested in and meet some of them and say, well, here's the part I know, I'd like to learn some more. Um, I think that's a really important thing that helps you circumvent this standoff between the bots.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And we can't do anything alone, right, Mike?
No,
We
no.
absolutely we need a team. What you're talking about sounds similar to like an R&D team, like a research and development. Does that still happen?
It sure does. Although, in our very entrepreneurial world, companies still definitely do R&D and governments still fund it. But I think a lot of that stuff happens organically in the entrepreneurial space now. Um, but I like that. It's brainstorming. It's a very healthy form of brainstorming. And I think the way to approach it, I think there's some important things that, and again, Steve and I have delivered networking seminars. You want to avoid the big ask. If you say to somebody, get me a job or tell me what to do, it's just too much to tangle with. But if you say to
Too
someone,
broad.
way too broad, right, and too much responsibility. But if you say, this is what I'm interested in, here's my background. What should I be studying? What's emerging? Who should I be talking to? That's an approach that's flattering and it's doable. I mean, my humble opinion and some experience at least, if you're busy about that, you're going to get what I call shots on goal. And even though I don't play
Shots on
hockey,
goal.
right? Even though I don't play hockey, I love the concept because what a professional hockey team will tell you is if I have 40 good shots on goal, I might win 3-2. But
Exactly.
you're sure not going to win if you're at the other end of the ice trying to do a slap shot across the whole thing that the goalie can see coming. So you want to be in there in conversations, working with people, pursuing some of these topics you're interested in. And that's just a completely different dynamic. And if you pair that up with some advice and brainstorming, then I think you really can get your feet under you. And you know what, too? We all need feedback. Um, Someone I was talking to about a personal board they're a wonderful person. They're a little on the fiery side. And they started thinking, yeah, you want somebody who doesn't even know what you do, but they know you. And they'll say to you, that's too timid, or maybe, but that's going to be a big stretch for you. What's wrong with that? I think we need that stuff.
I guess one thing that's really key is for people to be fully aware of what they know as well as what they don't know. Because, there's many of us that don't want to admit, well, I don't know how to do that. Or, they think they know everything and are not open to feedback or criticism. Or unfortunately, if you choose to be that way, you are not going to grow. You're not going to get the context you need. You're not going to expand in a way that you could if you're open to suggestions, right?
I couldn't agree more. And I think, if ever you're going to do some collaboration, it's time when a senior wants to think about getting back in the workforce, and we'll still touch on those different economic scenarios. But I think when a senior wants to start to think about getting back in the workforce, there has to be some honest assessment. I've had people as young as 45 years old tell me, I don't know what Slack, Teams, Google Meet, any of those common collaboration softwares. Now, my particular circumstances, I cheated. I never stopped. I started in tech many decades ago, and it just rode along with wave after wave after wave. Um, and sometimes when I work with older people, with our fellow seniors, sometimes they're surprisingly adept at, I can do video editing, I can do this, that, the other, but sometimes they're afraid. And I think the antidote to that fear is you can download anything. I tell people, if you don't know what Slack or Teams or Google Meet or the Google Suite is, if you don't know collaboration software, get a buddy, download some free or low cost stuff, and plan a golf tournament. I don't care what you do, as long as you're doing something with someone that's using that tool. And that way, you'll go from being an outsider to having your own initial reactions, and I like this and I didn't. And I think that's a far better positioning to walk towards the job market or a freelance opportunity.
Absolutely. Well, gosh, Mike, in terms of technology, you were way ahead of the rest of us. We were all sort of fumbling along trying to figure this out. But then, it's just a matter of when you're talking about, people that maybe don't know what Teams is or any of these other platforms, it's just getting somebody to sit down with you and go through the process. I mean, just ask Mela the stuff she had to teach me to do this podcast. Press this, press, okay. Well, now I sort of know what I'm doing, but it took somebody to show me.
Absolutely. And tell you what, humility is always wears well. I've been in technology so long. I help clients with multi-million dollar software decision making and all kinds of things. But I also recognize that if you want someone to reconfigure your phone, any nearby teenager is probably a great bet, right?
Or younger.
Yep. Yes, a middle schooler. That's right.
Yeah, yeah.
And so
Humility. What did you say? What did you just say about humility? It was really
it
good.
always wears well.
Yeah, humility wears well. Excellent.
Yeah,
Yes,
I
humility
think.
wears well.
And don't most of us, that part of the reason to do this kind of reflective work, this internal work, is to realize that we actually have done a bunch of event planning or requests for proposals. One of the things that I think is really interesting is that when you do a job, think of a job as a molecule. It's got a lot of atoms in it, and sometimes if the molecule isn't in demand some of the atoms might be. And I
Mm,
think that decomposition, and that's exactly what happened. This person I mentioned that ended up doing just, being very specific and spent a year doing brand persona and just got better and better at it. And then, on these freelance platforms, after a while, just like a ride share, you get so many 4 or 5 star rides, and then things start looking pretty good.
right, right. Okay, so talk about some of the other scenarios.
Yes. So I think too, then what happens is when you start talking about, hey, I got to get to work. I mentioned a lifeboat job where a tax preparer, that's something you can get your head around. And you really part of the reason why, I mean, I think Implana can help almost anyone, but on the other hand, um, your own community and your own locale, um, brushing up against the local university, innovation center, or whatever else makes sense, can just really help you find, whether it's a small incremental thing that you can start doing while you're still working or looking. Another thing I'd like to throw out there. I think we're all familiar with what the financial people tell us is the portfolio effect, right? You don't want to have all bonds, you don't want to have all stocks, and you don't,
Diversify.
right? You diversify, and
Hmm.
you don't want to have just all 6 month treasuries, and you don't want to have all 20-year equity plays, right? You want to mix up, you diversify. Well, you don't want to get quite as elaborate in the career, but I think having a couple of tracks, one track being, look, I'm going to pursue what I already know. I see that there's some demand for it, and I'm going to be a little persistent on that front and just network my way and, follow up until I make something happen. But maybe at the same time, you know, um, even if you live like that, even the person who really wants to get to work can safely and incrementally do a little bit of exploration. Okay, even with a low risk tolerance. A few years ago, my wife bought me a really nice drone, and I'm just so busy. It got dust for a couple of years until I got mad at myself. So I watched a couple of YouTubes, and it is an absolute hoot. It's a high res camera. I've got pictures of friends and neighbors' roofs now and gardens. And a friend of mine,
Oh,
a friend of mine at church said to me, "Would you take pictures of our next social event?" Now, if you can't see what this is ramping up to. So for my most recent birthday, the wife got me 2 books. One was drone photography. It was a bunch of good, practical, suggestions. Make sure there's scale in there. Put a person in it or something, a signpost that people can recognize size. Oh, okay. Some advice on color. But the other book was a bunch of drone businesses. And even
oh,
just in the couple of days I played around with this and showed people and did things, I'll tell you, a little light bulb was going off
for
because, like I said,
you.
absolutely. And, I got enough to do in another day job, so to speak, a nice consulting practice to draw on for this career work. But, I think we want to be looking at what could I do with additive printing, 3D printing. The things are low cost now. A couple few $100 can get you into a drone or this. And now let's get back to your scenarios. If somebody really needs to get to work, I think their spouse could want to kill them if they spend all their time playing around with drones and 3D printing. Uh,
Right.
right?
If money is a necessity, because yes, the three different scenarios that we described, they're quite different. The person that's retired but really can't afford to, the people that just need a little extra money, and the people that don't need any money but want something extra.
I know. So I absolutely respect that. And I think about risk tolerance and I describe this portfolio. So let's run through that spectrum a little bit. Okay.
Okay.
So for the person who really needs to get to work, what is a lifeboat job in your area or skill set? I mean, that's a great little research project that could lead to something very soon.
Mhm.
And following that up with networking to pursue, hey, I want to go to the tax preparer's social. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Is this as easy? Is this as good as I think? Can I do it? Um, you know, pursue that stuff. But I also think that in our very challenging job market, it makes sense, even for the person who is quite eager or even needs to get going, to put a little bit of time, 10 or 20% of their time maybe, into some other kinds of exploration, because you don't want to put all your eggs in one basket.
Just going to say that. Yeah.
So, I think we're shaping up here in a nice way that says, okay, here's our friend who really keen to get going, under some economic pressure. We'll respect that. We'll look for that lifeboat job. We'll let him get back in touch with old colleagues. Hey, can you use a sidekick, even if it's part-time, right? We're going to do all those sort of obvious or expected things. But we're also going to add in a little bit of very intentional networking, because your time is precious. And so let me try, even if you go to a couple of events a month, after a few months, that's actually important. If you've been to a half dozen things after a few months, you've got some new contacts, ideas, and so on, and hopefully some momentum. So even our person who's under duress, while they're busy doing, sort of the front door stuff, they can be exploring a bit through networking and maybe even a little bit of trial and error in something that's a little more far afield, but you never know. I mean, just put a little time into it.
What I'm hearing, Mike, is networking is key for all of this. And without the networking, you're just not you're unlikely to achieve what you're setting out to achieve. Know who to network with, where, and so on is really important to all of this.
Critical. And the sometimes there are some other secondary activities. I don't know how comfortable you are in kind of company corporate technology, but I met a guy 10 years ago, and he's telling me he knows all these old sort of mainframe reporting tools. I said, okay, good. Yeah, you can get work there. This stuff's never going to go away. And then, but he threw me a curve. A minute later, he starts talking about, yeah, but I also work on very modern products, something called Tableau that does dashboards and stuff. So here we have this person with kind of the barbell, a lot at each end, nothing in the middle. He's got the old retro skills and he's got some emerging ones. Well, you know what we ended up doing with him is we got him onto some work platforms, into some Indeed and other, job search places. And once he started looking at something called an information analyst, that was a pretty good umbrella that covered all these disparate elements.
An
And
information analyst.
right. And so part of the work, I think the primary things, Barb, are networking and some skills development, depending on who you are. But sometimes a little bit of research on what's out there, a little bit of rebranding. Like really for this person, I think the insight was branding. That his elevator pitch required a skyscraper, because by the time he told you about the mainframe, the old retro skills, and then he told you about the new things, I'm telling you, it's the 80th floor. You know what I mean? And what good is that? But once we put a badge around it, an umbrella called information analyst, oh, okay. And it turns out another benefit to this was there's a couple of other things he tuned up a little bit, and then he had a pretty good story. So, but this brings several principles together. It's this reflection, it's getting somebody to work with you who can give some feedback. And, you said something a minute ago about who and how you network. Let me give you an example of someone I think was not heeding the advice. Okay. I know someone who was a 40-year professor, PhD, a fellow in the Associated National Society. I mean, a venerable person. But you know what? It's brutal out there. Universities lay off too. And this person hadn't looked for a job in 50 years. And when they were looking, it was in academia. So I start talking about some of these things and where to go. And the person says to me, I know exactly what you mean. Every Monday morning, I get together with a bunch of unemployed women. And I'm thinking, well, that might be a nice support group, but that's not a personal board that's covering what's emerging or leading to what you should be studying or something. And so, I had to push back a little bit. Don't
Hmm.
confuse what's a little bit of moving out of your comfort zone and exploration with a support group.
And when you were talking about branding, I was thinking that, most of us don't understand branding or, how to develop a brand. That's something, you're going to hear. You need to know about branding. Okay, who do I talk to find out how to teach me about branding?
Well,
Right?
if that is an example, I said earlier, one of my latest things is topical networking. And you just gave me an awesome real life example. So now what happens is Joe or Mary says, I want to know about personal branding. How do I organize skills and experience into a brand? Now you're talking because that's something. Start Googling, look at the local university, the professional association. That's a great path to follow. And thank you for the example, because that is exactly what I'm talking about.
Hmm. What are some examples just for fun of people that may have, that are in one of these categories and may have started freelancing, doing something that they had never dreamt of and that was completely divorced from their previous job and that ended up more or less taking off.
Well, I think one of the things, the trickiest, let me start with the most adventuresome.
Okay.
It's not hard to start a venture today. I am sitting in a co-working space that costs $450 a month to rent, a drop-in center 24/7. It's got phenomenal amenities, 40 meeting rooms, 20 telephone booths, printing, network, snacks, coffee, water. It's got everything you want. So for a couple of $1,000s, I'll give you the US example. A person can get a tax ID and get an LLC, limited liability corporation, and a few months of rent at a co-working space. So, it means that it's pretty accessible if you want to start something. But
Mm.
the problem is that a whole new venture is the biggest jump. It's not an incremental step, it's a pole vault.
A
And
pole vault, yeah.
to do that, you really want to get people with business background. Don't even think about doing that until you have a spreadsheet that's pretty honest, that models what your profit and loss is going to look like. So that's one end of the spectrum. But you know what? If you've been waiting your whole life to try something, and you're maybe in that middle category where you're not hard pressed, but you want more, or maybe you're in that lucky category who doesn't need to work but it's time now. $2,000-3,000 US can get your toe in the water in some sort of venture today. it's
And
it's
that's not
it's
much.
it really isn't. Basically you can almost do it in a credit card type thing. But if it's an absolutely great idea that, I'm going to organize all these small businesses in my region, and I'm going to do something for them. And I've already talked to a lot of them and they're very interested, and I don't need to charge each one of them a lot of money. If you get a story that works like that, then maybe you keep pursuing. So as we think about this, Barb, and we think about the three different economic scenarios, certainly you don't want to rule out doing something bold, but that's the one you've got to do the most careful examination. You want to have an MBA or a CPA or somebody who really knows money and business look over what you're doing and give some honest feedback. You also want, one of the good things they do now, this came out of MIT, and I'm working with these grad students as a hoot, because I can share my experience and introduce them to other companies and things. But I think mentoring is often bi-directional. I mean, I just get an absolute hoot out of, what are you studying? What was the curriculum for that course? That sounds interesting. So just soak it all up.
You learn
So
from each
there's
other.
Oh, absolutely. So that's like the boldest one. Then kind of an incremental thing is, as I've explained it to you, these freelance platforms. I'll tell you what I did maybe 6, 7 years ago. I registered as an employer on Upwork and as a potential employee, as a potential gig worker. And it was a hoot. I mean, it cost nothing or $20 or something. I mean, it was not hard to do. And it was just a great exercise to see what both ends of that looks like. The other thing that happens is on these platforms, there's an extraordinary variance in venue and billing rate. Whatever it is you're looking for, that brand persona development that I mentioned, or a project manager or a tech writer, they go from as little as $10 an hour US to 300. And so what we would want to tell your listeners is you need to gauge, you need to spend a little time on this thing, find people who are doing what you think you could offer, see what they're charging. And then what happens is back to networking. Because if you can get a person or two to do a discounted project with you just so you can have a reference, that now you're really starting to move, right?
There's a lot of people that want to start a little cottage industry. Do you get people like that? Because they also know, I know how to make, I don't know, pottery or whatever, but how do I go about it? What am I supposed to do? How do I market this? Do I brand this? What do I do? Do you
Yeah,
get
not
people like that?
not so much. Remember, I live more in the tech, finance,
Okay.
accounting, underwriting, businessy kind of world. But Etsy, that's a pretty
Yes,
crazy
yes,
place.
yes, yes.
There has got to be an Etsy network not far from us, or a drop-in online. That's another great example you're giving of how you how you go about finding what you think you could do, and then we can talk about how to test that. Let me go and
Mhm.
find somebody else who's done it. And again, if you say to someone, set me up an Etsy shop, that's a big ask. If you go to a group and say, hey, how did you find this to get started? Any advice or, things you would have done differently? That's pretty accessible, and it's not a big ask.
Yeah. What's step one for me? Okay. Step two.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah.
So usually for me, these are in these kinds of professions and disciplines I just described, but it works just fine. It's just that you said earlier, you have to know who to network with. So if you're
Right.
going after a cottage industry, then you want to find you want to find a group, some personal board or mentors that are in that space, that are approachable. One of the things that you do that we try and get for the young people that I would say is worth poaching for a senior. The young people, the career people at the universities. There's a guy at Salve Regina where I got my grad degree, who has a really nice approach around getting an informational interview. And again, this is only a medium-sized ask because it's still a bit of time, but you're not saying to someone, get me a job or tell me what to do. What you're saying is, I'd like to get into support work for financial services software. I mean, I'm
Mm.
willing to start in the entry. Um, and an informational interview is someone who can say, well, I can tell you what those jobs are like, what the typical progression is. Are there variations in the duties? That's extremely valuable. So this career officer at Salve Regina in Newport, Rhode Island, is get some nice writing around that concept of the informational interview. But I think we can poach that. I think we can poach it for your cottage industry person. And really what you're looking for is say, I'll buy the coffee or the bagels, whatever, spend 20 minutes with me and tell me what you see. Tell me a little bit about this.
Mike, this is so valuable, this information. I mean, I feel like we've just barely scratched the surface with all of this, but you've given our listeners a lot to think about. But I don't want to end this before you tell us about the workbook.
Well, yes, I wrote a workbook several years ago, and I'm in the process of revamping it. So you're catching me in the middle, but that happens.
Yeah.
Um, Basically, I described to you a retrospective and internal dynamic, and then an external and prospective dynamic. Well, what this workbook does is it breaks down into 5 days, Monday to Friday, how to go about doing that. Some of us know how to get started at stuff, and some of us need some structure. One of the things that happens in our world is it is way too easy to go down a rabbit hole in the internet if you start looking for something. So what it's a pretty straightforward thing. On Monday, you're going to spend the whole day going through. Remember what we said about looking at your contacts, some files. You really want to you want to identify a few or a bunch of people I want to follow up with, things I've done. You want to seed the pump. And then as you move into Tuesday, you start doing a little bit of selection. Um, you know, hmm, you said something a few minutes ago about, I might be good at something else too. So add that to the mix.
Hmm.
Now, as you approach midweek, you want to start getting a little organized about what it is you think you might want to pursue. And now you're going to start the work of looking outward, maybe make a couple of phone calls, maybe make a plan to go to a networking event. And then Thursday, Friday is sort of an organizational activity that says, well, you know what? Let me lay out a 30, 60, 90-day plan that's got a track of networking, skills development, whatever makes sense for you. And so that mindset. Now, it's funny how we all are. We each have our reactions. Here at the co-working space, I have an enormously hardworking PhD friend. I'm very careful to only ask for 5 minutes at a time. She's really high powered. I showed this to her, and you know what she said? Mike, there's only 5 days. To her, this should be, what about Saturday and Sunday? Um,
Uh-huh.
we all have our own way. I mean, if you want to
Yeah.
work,
Yeah.
basically, when I think of this workbook, if you're really a high speed person and you're pretty organized, you might do that work in 5 hours. Another person might take 5 weeks. As long as you're structured about it and you don't, in consulting over the years, we sometimes use time boxes. Okay, this project is starting to go long. We're running over budget. Let's sit down, whether I've been the client, I've been the consultant, I've been the software house. All right, let's get serious. We're going to break this into 2 or 4 week chunks. We're going to work together for the next few months and we're going to get this thing on track. And I think you can see how that would work. We're agreeing. At this point, we're going to squeeze everything into here and then we're going to go on to the next thing. I think that is a good ethic to bring to this work. No black holes. Be a little bit disciplined. Make sure that you get, after several days that you've actually got a game plan together that says, wow, okay, I'm kind of excited. I'm going to try these things for networking. I'm going to see how to develop this or that skill. And maybe another track is some more research and exploration around how some of these things might play.
Yeah, it's very, very clearly laid out. It's easy to follow. It's an excellent resource. And you're revising it.
Yes, thank you so much. It's 5 years old, and I look at it, and I honestly I think like the diagrams and some of the stuff is a keeper. But when I was writing this 5 years ago, sales tax in the U.S. was a mystery. Online sales tax is actually a thing in the U.S. You got to deal with it. And at the time, it was an emerging issue. Now there's products, there's low cost things you can do. If you go get your website at GoDaddy or Wix or whatever you do, there's going to be a box you can tick and pay a little bit of money and get that taken care of for you. So that's a good example. Another thing too, I really want to focus on in this book this time is the difference between doing a job and consulting at it. If you really, really know a sector, I have a couple of concepts. If we just squeeze in one more minute here, one concept is what I describe as seats at the table. If whatever the process, or if I don't know, maybe you're familiar with requests for proposals, whether it's to get yellow lines painted in the parking lot or to get software for City Hall, whatever it is. If you've had multiple seats at that table, if you've written RFPs and then in another part of your life, you've responded to them in one business, and then you've evaluated proposals, and then you've delivered the work. If you've got two or three of those four seats, you really have a story. And that's an important insight. You might find if you are really good at writing RFPs, you might be able to get a job that gets you a little bit more money and, is of interest. But strategically, you might be better served taking a different seat at the table, because down the road, it's going to let you have more perspective and potentially come up with your own service offering. I think the insight is, remember I said that I'm changing the workbook to talk about how to go from doing work to consulting at it. So the
Mm-hmm.
first thing is this kind of an assessment that says, have I sat in more than one seat at the table? The broader that is, the better the service offering you might have. And then what I want to do is kind of outline how do you build your framework? Or like when you were doing this, there was something in the back of your head that says, this is what I need to do first. This is how I know, where I need to spend more or less time. Translating that into an assessment of a client and then developing a game plan for them. It's perfectly possible, but I think it's worth spelling out some of the steps and some of the thought process. So that's one good example of what's currently going on. I hope to have it done by the end of the year.
Well, we'll look for it. This has been. I just thank you so much for coming on and talking about this with us, because I think it's on a lot of our minds, right? And people are living so much longer and being productive so much longer, so it's so relevant. So, how can people get in touch with you? Your website, however they can reach you.
I mean, the best thing is the website. It's emplanacareer.com.
Should we spell it out?
Sure.
Emplana, career, career.com.
Thank you so much, Barb. That's exactly right. Sometimes a 40-minute call or a meetup or a Zoom or something, and when you spend a little bit of time with someone, sometimes that's all they need. So I welcome anyone to leave something that Emplana can follow up on, Emplana Career. And, but I'd also say, if you think about all the things we discussed, if somebody wouldn't mind rewinding the tape and listening to parts a second time, if you were doing that reflection and retrospective work and looking out in job boards and putting together a little personal board and doing some networking and maybe upskilling a little bit, refreshing some skills, boy, I think you'd be doing okay.
I think so too. I'm pretty sure there will be people that listen to this and will forward it on to others.
Well, that would be nice. Thank you. And that's why I really appreciate the chance to do this. And I feel like you were not only a good collaborator, you actually gave examples. Thank you.
Oh, good. I'm glad it worked. Okay, Mike, thanks again so much. And maybe we can have you back and expand on some of these ideas.
Thank you so much, Barb. I really appreciate how seriously you take this, and I appreciate you sharing your audience. Thank you.